Mallory had more than enough money in her son's bank account to save her life, but when she begged him to help pay for her cancer surgery, he looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I worked for my money. Your illness isn't my responsibility." She thought hearing the word cancer was the worst moment of her life, but nothing compared to the pain of realizing her own son had chosen his fortune over his mother. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Please stick with me, because what happened after that heartbreaking conversation changed this family forever. My name is Mallory, and after my husband passed away, I spent years working every job I could find to raise my 2 children. Every paycheck went toward giving them opportunities one never had. My son, Brett, eventually became a wealthy investment executive with a beautiful mansion, luxury cars, and more money than he could spend. My daughter, Noelle, chose a quieter life as a school librarian, earning just enough to cover her bills while always making time to check on me. When my doctor told me I had aggressive cancer and needed surgery as soon as possible, I truly believed my children would stand beside me. I never imagined the child who had everything would become the one who abandoned me. After Brett coldly refused to help and suggested I should have prepared better for old age, I walked out of his mansion fighting back tears, unaware that my greatest source of strength had been quietly waiting for me all along. After leaving Brett's house that day, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had led us to this moment. When my husband died, Noelle was only 9 and Brett had just turned 12. Overnight, I became both mother and father. I worked long hours cleaning offices during the day and waiting tables at night just to keep food on the table and pay the bills. Every dollar I earned went toward giving my children the future their father would have wanted for them. As they grew older, their personalities couldn't have been more different. Brett always wanted the newest shoes, the latest phone, and anything his friends had. I stretched my budget to make him happy because I never wanted him to feel deprived. Noelle rarely asked for anything. She appreciated every little gift and often gave up things she wanted so I wouldn't worry about money. Even after Brett became successful, weeks and sometimes months passed without a phone call unless he needed a favor or wanted paperwork from me. Noelle, despite earning very little as a school librarian, visited every week with homemade soup, helped fix things around the house, and made sure I never felt alone. Still, I kept making excuses for Brett, telling myself he was just busy building his career and that deep down he loved me. Then my doctor sat across from me with a serious expression and explained that delaying my cancer surgery any longer could allow the disease to spread beyond treatment. Hearing those words terrified me. Even after everything that had happened, I convinced myself my son deserved one final chance to prove I hadn't believed in him for nothing. The next morning, I gathered every bit of courage I had left and drove to Brett's beautiful home, hoping our last conversation had simply been a misunderstanding. His house was larger than anything I had ever imagined owning, and expensive cars filled the driveway. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me but invited me inside. I quietly explained that the doctor had warned me not to delay my surgery any longer and asked if he would please help me one last time. Brett sighed with irritation instead of concern. He told me medical bills were not his responsibility and said he had investment opportunities that promised much better returns than spending thousands of dollars on treatment. Hearing my own son describe my life as a poor investment broke something inside me. His wife, Avery, sat only a few feet away and listened without saying a single word. She avoided looking at me as Brett continued speaking. Then he suggested I sell my house, take out a loan, or figure something else out because he wasn't going to sacrifice his financial plans. I felt the room spinning as I realized there would be no kindness, no comfort, and no help. Fighting back tears, I quietly stood, thanked him for his time, and walked out the front door. Neither of them followed me. As I left, I didn't notice the housekeeper standing nearby, frozen after overhearing every painful word. When I arrived home, Noelle immediately noticed my swollen eyes and trembling voice. She gently asked what had happened, but I forced a smile and blamed it on another difficult doctor's appointment, refusing to let my children's relationship fall apart because of me. For 2 days, I tried to pretend everything was normal, but the weight of Brett's rejection became impossible to carry. Noelle kept checking on me, noticing that I barely ate and spent hours staring out the window. One evening, she gently took my hand and said she knew something was wrong. The kindness in her voice broke the walls I had been trying so hard to keep standing. Through tears, I finally told her about my visit to Brett's house and repeated every painful word he had said. Noelle sat in complete silence, her eyes filling with tears before she wrapped her arms around me. She wasn't angry because of the money. She was heartbroken that her own brother could treat our mother with such coldness. After comforting me, she quietly promised that I would get the surgery no matter what it took. I begged her not to do anything reckless because I knew she was already living paycheck to paycheck. She smiled, changed the subject, and assured me everything would be fine. Over the following weeks, I noticed she looked more exhausted every time she visited. She insisted she was simply busy at work, but the truth was far different. Without telling me, Noelle emptied her savings account, postponed her dream of buying a small home, sold the few valuable belongings she owned, and accepted a second job working evenings after leaving the library. She refused to let me see how much she was sacrificing because she knew I would stop her if I found out. Watching her continue to care for me with love despite her growing exhaustion made me realize that the child with the least money possessed the greatest heart, and that truth changed the way I saw my family forever. No matter how many extra hours Noelle worked, the total never came close to covering the cost of my surgery. She refused to give up, even as exhaustion became visible on her face. Every evening after finishing her shift at the library, she worked another job until late at night, then still found time to visit me with groceries and a warm smile. I believed things were finally improving because she never complained, but she was carrying a burden I knew nothing about. When her savings ran out, she quietly made another heartbreaking decision. She took out the small velvet box that held the engagement ring her late father had once given me before it was passed down to her. It was one of the few treasured pieces of our family's history. With tears in her eyes, she sold it, believing my life was worth far more than any keepsake. She also cashed out the modest retirement account she had spent years building, fully aware she was sacrificing her own future. Through every difficult choice, her fiancé, Grant, never hesitated to support her. He reminded her that they could rebuild their finances together, but they would never forgive themselves if they lost me because they hesitated. A few days later, I accidentally found paperwork showing the sale of the ring and the withdrawal from her retirement fund. My heart sank as I realized how much she had given up without telling me. I begged her to stop before she destroyed her own future. Noelle gently held my hands, smiled through her tears, and told me that money could always be earned again, but she would never have another mother. In that moment, I realized her love was the greatest sacrifice anyone had ever made for me. The morning of my surgery arrived sooner than I expected. As I packed a small hospital bag, I felt a mixture of fear and gratitude that was difficult to describe. I knew I would not be walking into that operating room if Noelle had not sacrificed nearly everything she owned to make it possible. She drove me to the hospital before sunrise, trying to stay cheerful even though I could see the worry in her eyes. Grant came with us, offering quiet encouragement and making sure every detail was taken care of. While nurses prepared me for surgery, I kept glancing at my phone without admitting why. A small part of me still hoped Brett would call, send a message, or simply ask if I was all right. The phone remained silent. As the doctors wheeled me toward the operating room, I squeezed Noelle's hand and thanked her for giving me another chance to live. She smiled through her tears and told me my only job was to come back home. The surgery lasted for several difficult hours. My family waited anxiously while the medical team worked to remove the cancer. When everything was finally over, the surgeon walked into the waiting area with a relieved smile and announced that the operation had been successful. Slowly, I opened my eyes in the recovery room, still feeling weak from the anesthesia. The first person I saw was Noelle sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. Dark circles under her eyes revealed she had barely slept for days, yet she refused to leave my side. Looking at her exhausted but hopeful face, I silently promised myself that if I was blessed with more time, I would never again mistake wealth for love or overlook the child who had proven what true family really meant. My recovery was slow, but every day I felt a little stronger. Noelle stayed by my side whenever she could, balancing work, hospital visits, and caring for me after I returned home. I noticed she looked more exhausted than ever, but she always smiled and insisted everything was fine. One afternoon, while organizing some paperwork she had accidentally left on my kitchen table, I discovered overdue bills, loan statements, and a notice warning that she could lose her apartment if payments weren't made soon. My heart dropped as I realized the true cost of saving my life. She hadn't only emptied her savings and retirement fund. She had buried herself in debt without telling me. When I confronted her, she tried to brush it aside, saying we would figure everything out later. Meanwhile, Brett continued living as though nothing had happened. At a family gathering, several relatives asked why he hadn't helped with my surgery. Instead of showing any regret, he shrugged and claimed he simply couldn't afford unnecessary medical expenses at the time. Everyone sitting around the table knew about his expensive vacations, luxury vehicles, and recent home renovations. His excuse was impossible to believe. The room grew quiet before a few relatives gently questioned how someone with so much could refuse to help his own mother. Brett immediately became defensive, insisting that nobody had the right to tell him how to spend his money and that his financial decisions were his business alone. I listened without saying a word. There was no argument left to make because his actions had already spoken louder than anything I could ever say. Watching him protect his wealth while Noelle struggled to keep a roof over her head filled me with a sadness deeper than I had ever known. A few weeks after returning home, I finally felt strong enough to sort through the old filing cabinet that had been sitting untouched since my husband's passing. I planned to organize medical papers and insurance records, but as I worked through the dusty folders, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were property documents I barely remembered signing decades earlier. They showed that my husband had purchased a small piece of family land years before his death. Everyone in the family had always believed it was worthless because it sat unused outside a growing town, so we never gave it another thought. Tucked behind the deed was a recent letter from a development company explaining they had been trying to contact me for months. The area had expanded rapidly, and several builders wanted the land for a new housing project. Their offer was worth more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my lifetime. I read the documents again and again, hardly believing they were real. After speaking with an attorney, I learned that the property belonged solely to me. No one else had any legal claim or authority over it. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't thinking about hospital bills or debt collectors. Instead, I found myself thinking about the choices my children had made when they believed I had nothing left to offer. One had turned his back on me when I needed him most, while the other had nearly destroyed her own future just to keep me alive. As I carefully placed the papers back into the envelope, I realized that this unexpected inheritance would not simply change my financial future. It would reveal the true character of my family once and for all. It didn't take long for news about the land to spread through the family. I had only spoken to my attorney and one trusted relative, yet somehow Brett found out. After months of complete silence, my phone suddenly started ringing with calls from him. He asked how I was feeling, offered to stop by, and spoke with a kindness I hadn't heard in a very long time. A day later, he arrived carrying an expensive bouquet of flowers and a basket filled with gourmet food. He hugged me as if nothing had ever happened and apologized in vague terms, saying he regretted that things had become so difficult between us. I listened carefully, waiting for him to acknowledge the pain he had caused, but those words never came. Instead, the conversation slowly drifted toward the property. He casually asked whether I had spoken with any developers, what they were offering, and whether I had considered selling. Every visit followed the same pattern. He would ask about my health for a few minutes before returning to questions about the land and my future plans. His concern felt rehearsed rather than heartfelt. At the same time, Noelle continued caring for me exactly as she always had. She drove me to follow-up appointments, prepared my meals, and helped around the house without mentioning the property even once. She never asked how much it was worth or whether I planned to sell it. Watching both of my children during those weeks opened my eyes in a way nothing else could. One appeared only after money entered the picture, while the other had stood beside me when she believed I had nothing to give. At last, I understood the difference between genuine love and affection that only appeared when wealth was involved. After spending several sleepless nights thinking about everything that had happened, I realized it was time to make a decision that could no longer be delayed. I called Brett and Noelle and asked them to come to my house the following Saturday afternoon. Neither of them knew why I wanted to see them together, but they both agreed to come. When they arrived, I invited them into the living room where the property documents and my updated estate papers rested on the coffee table. The atmosphere immediately felt heavy with anticipation. Brett glanced at the paperwork and smiled with quiet confidence, clearly believing he already knew how the afternoon would end. Throughout his successful career, he had always believed that people who achieved more deserved more. I could almost see him imagining how the value of the land would strengthen his already comfortable life. Noelle noticed the papers as well, but her reaction was completely different. She gently reached over, squeezed my hand, and told me that whatever decision I made would be the right one because it was my property and my future. She reminded me that she wasn't there to discuss money. She only wanted me to stay healthy and happy. Her words filled the room with a silence that Brett quickly broke by asking whether I had accepted an offer from the developers. I calmly explained that I had made my final decision about the land and everything else I owned. Both of my children looked directly at me as the room grew painfully quiet. The tension became almost unbearable. One child waited with expectation, convinced success entitled him to the biggest reward. The other waited with peace, expecting nothing at all. Only I knew which path my life had led me to choose. I looked at both of my children for a long moment before breaking the silence. My voice was calm, but every word came from months of heartbreak and reflection. I reminded Brett about the day I sat in his living room asking for help with my cancer surgery. I repeated the words he had spoken without anger or exaggeration. I told him that while I was terrified of losing my life, he had been more concerned about protecting his investments than saving his own mother. He lowered his eyes for a moment but quickly defended himself, insisting he had made a practical business decision and that everyone had the right to manage their money however they wished. I nodded and told him he was correct about one thing. The money had always been his to spend, just as my choices were now mine to make. Then I explained that wealth without compassion becomes meaningless because success has little value if it cannot be shared with the people who once sacrificed everything for you. Turning to Noelle, I thanked her for proving that true family is measured by love, loyalty, and sacrifice rather than income or possessions. I reminded her that she had risked her own future without asking for recognition or expecting anything in return. Brett interrupted several times, arguing that business always had to come first and accusing everyone of judging him unfairly. His excuses sounded weaker with every sentence. Even the relatives sitting quietly around the room could no longer defend his actions because they had watched Noelle struggle while he protected his fortune. Years of selfish decisions had finally led to this moment. Brett wasn't losing because of one mistake. He was facing the consequences of every choice he had made when kindness mattered most. After everyone had spoken, I took a deep breath and slid the signed documents across the table. There was no anger in my heart and no desire to humiliate anyone. I wasn't trying to punish Brett or get revenge for the pain he had caused me. I simply believed my final decision should reflect the truth of what had happened. I explained that nearly everything I owned, including the family land and the money from its future sale, would go to Noelle. My attorney had already arranged everything so her debts would be paid, her financial future would be protected, and she would finally have the stability she had sacrificed to save my life. Tears filled Noelle's eyes as she quietly shook her head, saying she had never helped me because she expected anything in return. I smiled and told her that was exactly why she deserved it. Then I turned to Brett. I handed him a small wooden box that had belonged to his late father. Inside was his father's old pocket watch, one of the few personal treasures he had left behind, along with a handwritten letter I had prepared. In it, I explained that money can be earned, lost, and earned again, but kindness is the greatest inheritance a parent hopes to leave behind. I wrote that I still loved him, but trust must be built through actions, not words. Brett stared at the watch and the letter without speaking. For the first time since my illness began, he seemed to understand what he had truly lost. The money was never the deepest consequence. The hardest burden was realizing he had broken his mother's faith in him, and no amount of wealth could buy that back once it was gone. Several months passed after that difficult family meeting, and life slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm I had almost forgotten was possible. The sale of the family land was completed, and Noelle handled every dollar with the same care and humility she had always shown. Before spending anything on herself, she paid off every debt she had taken on to save my life. Watching those financial burdens disappear lifted a weight from both of our shoulders. Afterward, she and Grant found a modest, comfortable home with a sunny backyard where I could continue recovering in a quiet and welcoming environment. They invited me to move in with them, insisting that I would always have a place in their home. It wasn't a mansion filled with expensive furniture, but it was filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine love. My health improved steadily as the months went by. Each follow-up appointment brought encouraging news, and my doctors were pleased with my progress. Noelle and Grant celebrated every small victory with me, reminding me that healing was about more than medicine. It was also about being surrounded by people who truly cared. Brett remained distant after our last conversation. He sent a few brief messages over the following months, but they never went beyond polite words. I sensed that he finally understood the cost of the choices he had made. His success and wealth had given him many comforts, but they could not repair the trust he had broken or erase the memory of turning his back on me when I needed him most. Forgiveness would take time if it ever came at all. As I looked around my new home one evening, I realized that my greatest blessing had never been money. It was discovering who truly stood beside me when everything else fell apart. Months after everything that had happened, I found myself standing on the porch of Noelle and Grant's home as the evening sun settled across the backyard. Through the window, I could see them setting the dinner table, laughing over something that seemed so ordinary yet felt incredibly precious to me. There was a time when I believed my greatest fear was cancer. I thought the illness would be the hardest battle I would ever face. Looking back, I realized the disease had tested my body, but betrayal had tested my heart. Losing my health frightened me, but discovering which child truly loved me changed my life forever. Brett had accumulated millions and enjoyed every comfort money could provide, yet when I needed compassion most, his wealth could not teach him kindness. Noelle, who had struggled financially for years, never hesitated to risk her own future to save mine. She gave up her savings, her security, and her dreams without asking for recognition or expecting anything in return. That sacrifice made her the richest person in our family in every way that truly mattered. Today, our home is not built on expensive furniture or impressive bank accounts. It is built on loyalty, gratitude, and unconditional love. My health continues to improve because I wake up every morning surrounded by people who genuinely care whether I am smiling. Brett still has the opportunity to change his future, but that choice belongs to him alone. As I finish sharing my story, I hope it reminds everyone listening that life has a way of revealing people's true character when times become difficult. When a family faces its hardest moments, money never reveals who truly loves you. Actions always do.